My masterpiece is Godfather, the first one from 1972, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, obviously, starring Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, James Caan, Dan Keaton, a stacked cast. Quick logline, as if anybody needs to know. The aging patriarch of an organized crime dynasty transfers control of his clandestine empire to his reluctant son. Like I said, I mean, I could pick this one or the second one. I think I've seen this one more times, and maybe that's sort of why I picked this. And honestly, what's there to say about these movies, right? We've been hinting at these movies since the moment we started recording because they're
Yeah.
just such a iconic part of not just American movie canon, but movies in general. I love and hate, I should say, the four favorites letterbox thing that goes around, and invariably the Godfather part one, part two are in those
hmm
for pretty much anybody and everybody. It doesn't matter what age you are, where you come from, they're always in there. And that there's a reason for that. I think the reason why I maybe slightly prefer this one over the other one is because we are meeting all these people the first time. And there's
hmm
something about that. And there's something about specifically the dynamic between Brando and Al Pacino. And maybe I'm sort of just leading with the buried lead, which is that this is probably one of, if not the best performance put by an actor on screen in Al Pacino's
hmm
performance. Like it's just absolutely incredible. What's to say more about this movie? I feel like I'm like circling around, which is that it's perfect, right? In terms of how it's mounted, how it looks and feels, all its themes on family, relationships, the entire mise en scène, every department sort of, killing it on and running on all cylinders. It's deep, but it's also very watchable and kind of pulpy. And I would say this about both the movies. I think the
hmm
second one is maybe a little bit more pulpy. It depends on what side of the bed you wake up. Because if you pull out certain scenes and lines from the movies, I guess they become so memified now and they're so in the culture. Maybe that's part of it. But, Mario Puzo's books are pulpy.
Right,
And I
right.
think that's where you and I, we often talked about this, like Hitchcock and such, which is that some of the great art that's all encompassing cultural milestones that are part of our fabric for generations are often based on material that is pulpy, which just makes it more relatable. But then when it's elevated with depth and the mise en scène coming together in such a way, it just makes it indelible. But, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about there are movies of this caliber that have been made. What is it about this one and the second one that makes them endure the way they do? You could say this about the David Lean movies. You could say this about Kubrick movies. You could say this about Hitchcock movies. And yes, they are very much part of our culture, but
hmm
they're not the same way that these two movies are. And I haven't given it like a ton of thought, but my first thought is that I think it's because it's about family and who we are as a human species. These themes of leaving home, wanting a better home, wanting to be close with somebody in the family, wanting to follow the footsteps of your father or your mother, which kid lives up and which doesn't,
hmm
who takes on the legacy. These are universal themes that we've been living with and fighting with since the beginning of times. And maybe that's what is about these movies that endures. And I'll pass the mic to you, but the last thing I would say is that before I sat down to watch these movies again, and this one especially, in my head, even though I know this, of course, because they're iconic set pieces like the wedding scene and
Oh
the
yeah.
horse and
hmm
all of that, all I think about the movie when I'm not watching it is Brando sitting in his room talking to people, well
mm
dressed men talking in a lower volume. And
hmm
then when I watch it, every time I'm surprised by how epic these movies are, which again takes me back to what I was saying about The Rainmaker. Of course, these two movies are the epic examples of that, which is that they're so epic in scope and scale, but yet they're so intimate. It was so mind-boggling again to watch this movie because I hadn't seen it in a few years of like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, this is huge. And even though I know the big scenes are in there,
hmm
I just don't think of them. I think about the family dynamics and the lines and the looks between characters because they're deep character studies while being in these larger themes and this epic scale, which is just so hard to do. And how young he was, it's just, I don't know. It's overwhelming to think about and talk about these movies.
Yeah, I mean it's just my we talked about this movie already in the our
Yeah.
family episode, so I'll post the link below for that. So I've talked about how, again, I think you're right. This does hit on these universal themes of family and and sort of maximizes the drama of that. And that's what makes it, I think, endure cross cultures and just for all time and every generation, because these are
Mhm.
issues that always are there. If you have a family, these things will come up. Not obviously to the extreme of this movie where, your family members are getting killed and involved in clandestine activities, but it says a lot about what family means. So I think that is probably why it endures
Yeah.
so much. And so then, I've talked about the family piece of it a lot. So the other kind of layer is what I associate a lot with both of these movies, but we'll get into Godfather 2 in a bit. Spoilers on that one. Is I think a lot of this, at least in America, it resonates so much because these movies are, and this movie specifically is a lot about the American dream and
Right.
what that means and the allure of it, the reality of it, and a lot of the downsides and the dark sides of it.
Yeah.
The You're trying to make it rich at all costs, I guess so, because you're now involved in illegal activities. Though you always have to be innovating and changing to keep up with your competition. And Marlon Brando's character in this movie decides he doesn't want to get into drugs. He has a higher standards, even though that's where the market is moving. He doesn't want to play in that, and then that's what gets him assassinated or attempted assassination, and all the drama kind of stems from him refusing to innovate in bringing in drugs into his criminal activities instead of just gambling. They look upon that as not as big of a vice as drugs, which actually can cause, real harm. Though gambling can too. I don't mean to
Hmm.
diminish the issues with that, but I think potentially that is why these movies, this one in particular, resonates so much, at least in American culture, because there is a lot of that. Go get him. I want to do, start my own thing, do something innovative, go after, get rich. Is a lot of what drove these characters. I mean, it gets into more of the history of it in the next movie, which we'll get into. But this one, I think, is a lot of that allure of just Michael too, of trying to stay out of that, but then eventually gets pulled into it, and then he enjoys it. And a lot of it is the
Hmm.
power, but also it's the success of what he gets into as he becomes the new Don, essentially by the end of this movie. So I think that's another layer that I always associate with this movie. Not only because of the opening monologue, where it's like, this is what I love about America, like
Right.
that famous monologue, but I do think this is a lot reflective on the American culture, especially of the 20th century.
Yeah.
It's another thing I think
But
why it
even those
resonates.
themes are universal, America sort of symbolizes, and we've talked about this before, America is very good at marketing.
Right.
And there's truth to that too, if on an average, the American dream, there are more true stories of that coming to fruition here than other places,
That's
probably. I
mm,
don't know.
yeah. I think
It, or
they like
maybe
you to
it's just marketing again.
yeah, yeah. We don't need to get this into be our
Right.
America episode part 4 yet, but yeah, I think it is universal. But I think America, and maybe this is just me speaking as an American, represents those things to a lot of the rest of the world. So because
Hmm.
this movie involved that, at least in my mind, I associate that with America, even if it might just be the marketing, which I do think it is. But yeah, like you said, like what can you say? I mean, I think the acting is some of the best acting in any movie. I mean, Brando being 47 and playing this role where he looks like he's like 60, and I think this might be his greatest performance, or
Right.
maybe Apocalypse Now. Honestly, we didn't really touch on him too much in that last discussion, but I think that also performance is just totemic. But this is just something else. Like what he's able to pull off in this is just being very subtle too, and sort of quiet and understated. But you can see the intelligence of what Vito's thinking about and doing and how he cares about his family, but at the same time, he's kind of putting them in jeopardy by pulling them into the business. It's just a fascinating performance. I just want to call him out because I agree with you on the Pacino thing. That is every time I see it, I just have more
Blown away.
respect for what he was able to do. I mean, that restaurant scene alone when he has to kill the rival and the police officer is just some of the best acting you will ever see
Yeah.
anywhere. Just
Yeah.
stunning.
And then we cannot not mention the brothers dynamic, right? Like
Oh
how
yeah.
these three people are, again, amazing performances, and James Caan and Cazale.
Hmm.
That whole dynamic is absolutely incredible. And of course, it gets fleshed out even more in the second movie. But then it's also about the little moments, food being cooked and how people are eating, and celebrating each other or knocking each other down. And it just all feels so organic and real. It's almost like watching somebody else's lives that mirrors your own life in a way, even though our lives are nothing like this, obviously. But there's almost like a reality TV kind of quality to it in a way that whenever I watch a scene somewhere, I have to watch the whole thing because you sort of get pulled into it.
Right, exactly. I think that was why Coppola was hired because he was, an Italian American, and the studio wanted that authenticity
Right.
in the movie, and he was brought in. And I think this is not something that anyone thought would be successful. They also were breaking a lot of ground too. I mean, the cinematography in this movie with all
Yeah.
of the shadows and the darkness that they were able to do was very innovative at the time, and
Hmm.
something that and now every movie sort of has that type of look to it. Or not every movie, but it's much more prevalent now than it was back then. So this again shows how he was innovating and trying to push boundaries and, again, elevating that pulpy material, like you said. It's a lot of crazy on-set studio issues back and forth with this, but
Yeah.
he fought for his vision, and this put him on the map, honestly. Just making this, I think, just put him in the pantheon of Hollywood. And then he followed it with three other incredible movies with Conversation, Godfather 2 and Apocalypse Now, like that run. But it all started here, which you can feel, at least when I watch it, that this is sort of like that lightning in a bottle thing of all these people, sort of these elements coming together almost by accident and
Yeah.
not cooked up in a lab. It's just like almost like, someone accidentally mixed some chemicals together in the lab and then you get something incredible. That organic feel is what I get out of this. Like, it doesn't feel like, oh, I have this specific vision that I want to do. Like, you can kind of feel the improvisation that was going on amongst the actors in Coppola where they're trying to sort of figure it out. And that I think is a lot of part of his style and what makes this movie still feel fresh to me every time I see it. It never feels old, and every sudden death and murder still hits me, even though I know it's coming,
Right.
and it still feels shocking, especially when his wife in Italy gets blown up. Every time I'm
Yeah.
just like, it gets me, even though I know it's coming. But just the power of this film. I mean, you can't talk more good about it. I mean, hopefully everyone who's listening to this has seen it. If you haven't, definitely get out there and set aside a whole day, really. I mean, I watch all three every time. I can't just watch one. I get sucked into the world and I don't want to leave it. So I then, watch two and then three. And then after three, I'm like, I'm done with this world now because three's not that great. It's okay. I think it gets crapped on a little more than it should. But
I've
yeah,
never seen it.
you should see it. You definitely should see it. I think there's a lot of things that are great in it,
Mm.
but it feels like they were going for a very different thing in three than they were with the first two. But you definitely should see. I actually, even though we didn't have to watch three for this podcast, I took an afternoon and watched all three because I can't just go in a little bit. I just want to stay in this world just because of what Coppola's constructed here is so
Yeah,
special.
I agree, especially with the first two. Like, I've stopped now thinking about which one is better because they are a package. It's one movie, it's one story that has to be consumed that way.
Hmm.
That said, I think it is the organicness, like you were saying. There's something about that, and there's just Brando being part of it, and you're
Oh
being
yeah.
introduced to this new world. It just feels there's something maverick and fresh and tighter as a result of that with this movie versus the second one, though amazing and great, obviously. It just feels like, okay, now this person has wings,
Mm.
versus in this movie, I don't think he has his wings yet fully.
Mm-mm.
And yet it's
No.
just so compelling. And there's something about that draws me in a little more, just a tad.
Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.